The only thing scarier than being inside a firebase when the Viet Cong attacked was being outside of it. Every single night, 3 men were ordered to leave the safety of the barbed wire, crawl 100 yards into the pitch black jungle, and lie down in the mud in total silence. They were the listening post, and they knew that if an enemy assault came out of the dark, they were going to be the first ones to die. This is what that job was actually like. The firebase was the safest place in the jungle. Rings of concertina wire, sandbag bunkers, howitzers zeroed on every approach, trip flares strung through the grass, claymore mines aimed outward waiting for a hand to squeeze the trigger. Behind that wire, a man could almost believe he would live to see morning. The listening post was the price of that belief, because wire and sandbags only work if you can see the enemy coming. And in the jungle at night, you could not see the enemy coming. Under triple canopy on a moonless night, the darkness was total. A man could not see his own hand in front of his face. So the army pushed its eyes and ears out past the wire. 2 men, sometimes 3. Occasionally, God help them, just 1. They went out at dusk, before the last of the light was gone, so they could find their spot and settle in. They came back at first light, if they came back at all. They carried almost nothing, an M16, around 200 rounds, a few grenades, a claymore or two, a handful of trip flares, and the one thing that mattered more than the rifle, the radio, the PRC-25. The men called it the Prick 25. Everything else stayed behind. Anything that rattled, anything that clinked. They taped down their gear. They darkened their faces. And they did not smoke because a single cigarette cherry in that blackness could be seen from 200 yards away. Then they crawled out into it. The rule was simple and it was brutal. Do not fire. Do not fight. If you shoot, you tell the enemy exactly where you are, and you are 3 men against a battalion. Your job is not to win. Your job is to hear. So they lay there, and they listened. Every hour, the radio operator back inside the wire would key his handset. Not to talk. Talking could get a man killed. He would simply break the squelch, and the soft hiss of static in your ear would cut out for a second. That was the question. Are you alive? Are you clear? And the man on the listening post answered the only way he safely could. He keyed his own handset twice. 2 small breaks of static. Yes, alive. Nothing moving. 1 break meant something else. 1 break meant they are here. A soldier named Jerry Prater of the 1st Battalion, 8th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division, remembered that the real enemy on the listening post was not always the Viet Cong. It was sleep. After weeks in the field, a man could fall asleep with his eyes open. Prater did, more than once, and was sent straight back out as punishment. His platoon sergeant taught him the only trick that worked. When your eyes started to close, you pushed yourself up into the push-up position and held it. The strain kept you awake. The pain kept you alive. And then there was everything the jungle did to you while you lay still. The mosquitoes, the rain, the mud soaking through to your skin, and the leeches, working their way into your boots, up your sleeves, one veteran remembered, into your nose and your mouth. And you could not move. You could not slap them away. You could not curse. You could only lie there and take it, and listen. To understand the terror, start with 3 Marines and a tree. The 2nd of January, 1968. The hills around Khe Sanh. A lieutenant named Niall Buffington sent a 3-man listening post out toward a lone, distinctive tree the men had started calling the Hangman's Tree. Shortly after midnight, the radio came alive with a whisper. The listening post had movement. North Vietnamese soldiers. Close. Then the whispering stopped. The men back on the perimeter waited. They broke squelch. Nothing. The listening post had gone completely silent. Because by then the enemy was so close that even a whisper into the handset would have gotten all 3 of them killed. And then, finally, one last transmission. Barely there. The North Vietnamese had walked right past them. Through the dark. Close enough to reach out and touch. 3 Americans had lain frozen in the grass while an enemy force filed by an arm's length away and had made the coldest calculation a soldier can make. That saying nothing and letting the enemy pass was more survivable than making a single sound. Now understand what they were listening for. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army had a weapon the Americans feared more than any human wave. They were called Dak Cong, sappers. These were not ordinary infantry. They were among the most highly trained soldiers of the entire war, and their specialty was getting inside a defended position without anyone knowing they were there. A sapper attack began days before the attack. Reconnaissance teams would study a firebase for a week or more, counting the guards, timing their patrols, mapping every bunker, every gun, every strand of wire. Some units built models of the target in the dirt and rehearsed until every man knew his lane in the dark. Then, on the chosen night, they came. They came nearly naked, in shorts, their bodies smeared with grease and charcoal so no skin would catch the light. They carried wire cutters, Bangalore torpedoes, and satchel charges packed with explosive. And they moved an inch at a time. They found the trip flares and tied down the strikers so they could not fire. They found the claymore mines and cut the wires. They took the concertina and cut each strand 2/3 of the way through, then snapped it silently by hand, one strand at a time, opening a lane just wide enough to crawl through. The last 200 yards could take them 6 or 7 hours. 6 or 7 hours of crawling in total silence toward men who had no idea they were coming. That was what the 3 men on the listening post were out there to catch. Not an army on the march, a whisper of cloth, the soft click of a wire cutter, a single breath that did not belong. In December of 1967, near a place called Bo Tuck, a soldier named Bill Kelly volunteered for the job nobody wanted. Kelly served with Delta Company, 4th Battalion, 9th Infantry, the regiment they called the Manchus. That night, he led a 3-man listening post out past the wire and settled his team into a dried-up waterhole, roughly the length of a football field from the tree line. By one veteran's published account, what happened next is one of the purest examples of what the listening post was for. They lay in that hole, and they watched the tree line fill with men. Not a squad, not a platoon. Kelly estimated 75 to 100 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong massing in the dark to overrun his base. And there they were. 3 men, a few dozen yards away, directly in the path of the assault. Kelly gave his team the only order that made any sense. Do not fire. Do not move. Do not give away our position. Not until they are right on top of us. Then he picked up the radio, and he did the most dangerous thing imaginable. He called the artillery down on himself. He gave the base the enemy's strength and direction, and then he began to walk the shells in. 100 meters closer, then 50 meters closer, adjusting the fire of his own guns until the rounds were landing almost on top of his own team. He called napalm onto the tree line and felt the heat of it roll over the hole. The 3 of them rode it out, cut off. Their radio shot up, pressed into the mud of that waterhole while the world came apart around them. And at first light, a relief force from the Manchus fought its way out and found them alive. Bill Kelly was awarded the Silver Star. 3 men had heard an assault forming in the dark, and instead of running from it, they had turned themselves into the aiming point. But Kelly's men lived. A lot of them never got that ending, because the cruelest truth of the listening post was written into the job itself. The whole point of putting men outside the wire was that they were outside the wire. They were the tripwire. And a tripwire, by design, is the first thing the boot comes down on. To see what the listening post was worth, look at what happened at a base that decided it didn't need one. Fire Support Base Marianne. The night of the 27th into the 28th of March 1971, the base was held by Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 46th Infantry of the Americal Division, around 230 Americans. Their brigade commander, Colonel William Hathaway, had a policy. He considered listening posts outside the wire a hazard, so on Marianne there were none. No ears in the dark, no tripwire. Out beyond that wire, roughly 50 sappers of the 409th Viet Cong Sapper Battalion were already crawling in. They cut their lanes through the wire. They timed their movement to an 82mm mortar barrage so the sound of the shells would cover the sound of the assault. They mixed tear gas into the attack to blind and choke the defenders, and they crossed the entire perimeter without alerting a single sentry. The first the men of Marianne knew of the attack was when the satchel charges started going off inside their own bunkers. By the time it was over, 30 Americans were dead and more than 80 were wounded. Some accounts put the toll even higher. It was the worst single firebase attack of the entire war. A general was relieved of command. Creighton Abrams himself held the leadership responsible. 50 men had walked through the wire of an American firebase as if it were not there. The 3 men who might have heard them coming had never been sent out, and when the men were sent out, being the tripwire meant exactly what it sounds like. Fire Support Base Gold, the 21st of March, 1967, the Battle of Suoi Tre. An outer patrol from the 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, sat in the dark about 500 meters beyond the base. At 4:30 in the morning, they reported movement near their position. Then, for 2 hours, nothing. At around 6:30, just as the patrol got ready to come home, the sky fell in. Some 650 mortar rounds slammed into the firebase, and the 272nd Viet Cong Regiment, roughly 2,500 fighters in 6 battalions, came pouring out of the tree line. The outer patrol was directly in their path. It was overrun in about 5 minutes. Every man killed or wounded before the main assault even reached the wire. The base itself held, barely, saved by point-blank artillery firing canister rounds like giant shotguns, and by an armored relief column that punched through in time. When it ended, 647 enemy dead lay around the perimeter. 36 Americans had been killed. The men on the outside had lasted 5 minutes. They had also given the base its first priceless seconds of warning. That was the arithmetic of the listening post. A handful of men, spent in minutes, to buy the hundreds behind the wire the time they needed to reach their guns. The Americans were not the only ones who paid this price. The Australians in Phuoc Tuy province called it a standing patrol. Same idea. Same terrible exposure. On the night of the 17th into the 18th of February 1968, during the Tet Offensive, a 10-man section of Australian engineers, sappers of 3 Troop, 1st Field Squadron, was sent 300 meters outside the wire of a base called Fire Support Base Anderson. Their job was to lie on a small rise the enemy had been using for weeks and listen. The enemy found them first. Mortar and rocket fire came down directly on the standing patrol. When it lifted, 4 of the 10 men were dead. Staff Sergeant McLaughlin, Lance Corporal John Garrett, Sapper Alan Pattison, Sapper David Steen. 3 more were wounded. A survivor named Jack Lawson put it in 6 words that no official report ever improved on. We were hung out to dry. And there is a final, bitter footnote. Sapper David Steen lived through that night. About a month later, he and 2 other men who had survived the same standing patrol were killed by a mine in the long high hills. The war did not give the men outside the wire much margin, and even surviving the night was not the end of it, because at first light, the listening post had to come home. And coming home meant crawling back toward a firebase full of exhausted, frightened men who had spent the whole night waiting for shapes to appear out of the dark. You were one of those shapes. The men on the perimeter had spent hours with their fingers on triggers, staring into the tree line, primed to fire at the first movement. Now movement was coming, straight at them, from exactly the direction the enemy would come. So the return was a negotiation conducted entirely over the radio. Careful, slow, a whispered count, a recognition signal, a perimeter guard passing the word down the line. Ours coming in, hold your fire, hold your fire. Men who had survived a night lying a few yards from the enemy could still be killed by their own side in the last 100 yards, walking back to safety, if a single link in that chain failed. The Army learned that lesson the hard way, and it stayed learned. To this day, the doctrine that grew out of nights like these fixes precise entry and exit points and marks them as no-fire zones. A direct answer, written in someone's blood, to the problem of the men outside the wire coming back in. Ask a listening post veteran what he remembers, and he will almost never talk about doctrine or tactics or the radio. He will talk about the dark, the way it pressed down on you, the way sound became everything, every insect, every shift of wind, every snapping twig turning your blood to ice. He will talk about lying in the mud, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to his own heartbeat, and praying it wasn't loud enough to give him away. For a lot of them, that fear never fully left. It followed them home. It waited for them in the quiet. The listening post still exists today, in one form or another, in armies all over the world. The technology has changed. The idea has not. Someone still has to be the first to know. But think about what was actually being asked of those men. Every night, the safest place in the jungle was kept safe by sending a few of its own people out into the most dangerous place in the jungle. The wire only meant something because someone was lying in the dark beyond it. The hundreds slept because the 3 did not. They were not sent out to fight. They were sent out to hear. And, if it came to it, to be the first to fall, so that everyone behind them would have the seconds they needed to live. 3 men, 100 yards of empty ground, and the whole black weight of the jungle pressing in. That was the job. If you made it this far, you already know these are the stories that don't get told enough, and neither of us can get enough of them. YouTube thinks you're going to like the video on your screen right now, and honestly, we think you will too. go ahead and click it.